You look like... Oh, you look alright, Dad. You're looking good. Okay, so start off with what your earliest memories, Dad. What do you remember first?
Well, I was born in Poole in 1938 on a Sunday. I'm the 8th child of 11 and I'm the 7th boy. The 3 younger children below me died at an earlier age, so I don't remember much about them. I remember their names, but that's about all. They died when I was very young. I don't remember much about my father. He died when I was very young. My earliest memories are that I started school when I would be about 5 years old. I went to a school which was run by nuns. It was a Catholic school in Norton Road in Poole, and I was taught there by nuns. I'm a natural left-hander, but in those days left-handed people weren't considered to be normal people. In other words, you weren't allowed to write with your left hand. So I now write with my right hand, but I'm left-handed and left-footed for everything else. So I'm virtually a left-hander. As a youngster, we lived in Poole in the High Street, and the main house I remember is that we lived in number 15 High Street when I was very young. That house no longer exists, it was pulled down, and then we moved across to number 28. Now number 28 used to be a lodging house. It was run by a family, but it became available to rent, and it's a house that we rented, and it had 3 floors. It had flagstone floors downstairs and wooden floors on the upper 2 stories. There was a kitchen range in the kitchen, which was fired by coke, which meant that you had quite a lot of smog in the ceiling. But the upstairs rooms were wooden floors. The house wasn't powered by electric; it was powered by gas, which was the gas was a shilling in the meter, which you had to fulfill, and obviously the problem was trying to get shillings to put into the meter. A shilling today is about 5p in modern money. The upstairs floors, we went to bed with a candle on a candlestick because there was no electricity or gas upstairs. They had a fireplace upstairs, but obviously the fires were never lit. And they were on 2 floors. There were 3 bedrooms on 1 floor, and on the very top floor, which was the attic, which in those days was called a garret, which is, as I say, it's an attic today. And there were 2 floors up there, and I was often in the top floor in the garret, and we slept head to tail in the beds. Life as a child, we didn't have pocket money as such. What I used to do was on a Saturday morning when I was sort of in the age of about 6, 7 years old, I used to there was a hand cart available, and when it was my turn to go, I used to go down along the quay to the end of the quay to the gasworks, where they used to unload the cargo boats with the coal, and they turned it into coke and took the gas off. It was 1 in 6 in old money for a bag of coke, which was enough to put into the hand cart. You bought your ticket at the gate, but when you got towards to where the man was serving up the coke, he used to have a big shovel and you put it into a bag. You gave him the ticket and you also gave him a 6pence. That way you got a double amount virtually to what you'd paid for. Now, I used to do 3 trips on a Saturday morning, and I used to start roughly around about 8 o'clock in the morning and finish, time I'd done the first trip, I was in the queue maybe about 50, 30 or 40 back. The second queue I might be about 70 back, and by the third queue I would be a long way back, so it was normally about midday. time I'd finished. That was my pocket money. I used to get sixpence for that because I used to get tuppence a trip for each trip I made. The sixpence I spent on a Saturday afternoon. There was a cinema at the end of the high street, at the top end, called the Amity. Now, for sixpence, I could go into the chip shop, into the Amity chip shop, and for tuppence you could get a big bag of scraps. That was the remains of when they used to fry the fish and chips. You'd get offcuts of fat and chips, small bits and that, which they scooped out and put to one side. It could be rendered down, but they would sell it for tuppence a bag to the families. And the fourpence was spent to get into the Amity cinema to watch the Saturday afternoon films for the children. Also, with fish and chips, if you took a large packet of old newspapers up to the chip shop, you would get a bag of chips. So that was a bonus if you could collect enough newspapers. Another thing that happened when I was a youngster was after I left school during the daytime, especially in the winter time, from October, November through to about January, in Poole they used to have sprat boats, and it was quite an organised operation, and it was quite popular. There was to land lots of sprats in Poole, and as a kid, when I came home from school, I would often be sent down to the quay with all the other children. And what you did was, when they unloaded the sprats, they used to unload them into a bushel, which was about 60 pound of sprats. Well, they shoveled them into these bushels, and when they hoisted them and dumped them onto the quay, the sprats used to spill off the top, which obviously they weren't too worried about. So the kids, myself and the others, used to scrabble, and if you were lucky, you had sprats for tea. So that was one of the things that we had to do, as well as the other things. As for living conditions, we never had a bathroom when I was young. Nobody had a bathroom. Nobody had an indoor toilet, not down in the old town of Poole. What you had a toilet outside in the yard, and also in the yard at the end there was a little outhouse with a copper in that you did the washing in, and also in the yard there was a mangle which you used to wring the clothes out. And also in the yard there was the toilet. In the toilet you didn't have toilet paper. What you had was newspaper cut into squares or torn into squares and hung on a bit of string. So that was the toilet paper that we used in those days. In the bedroom, as I said, no toilets. You either had a bucket or a po. Obviously most undesirable, so you made sure that you went to the toilet before you went to bed. Also in the yard there was what's called a meat safe. Now there were no fridges in old Poole in those days. What people had was a meat safe. It was a box on the cool side of the building out in the yard, where it had a wire mesh on it, and you put your meat and your the bits and pieces in to try to keep them outside to get a bit of fresh air. Obviously, I was born before the war, so during the war, most food was on ration. So you had what's called coupons. So you were only allocated a certain amount of food per person per ration book. For clothes, a lot of the clothes that I wore during the war were hand-me-downs, or they came from the Red Cross. As a child, playtime, well, we were out and about, we were free to come and go. I used to go with Hamworthy, I used to go down to the quay a lot, watch the boats unload, and the timber boats, the coal boats, whatever. We had fun days as a kid, you know. I don't remember it being hard. All the families were the same. We all lived and shared things. If someone knocked on the door or they wanted to borrow something, you let them borrow it. No doors were locked. Nothing was hidden away. It was neighbour help neighbour. We were all friendly. Everybody knew everybody. I've got a large family of cousins, because mother had brothers and sisters, so there were lots of cousins in the family, So there was lots of interaction in as much that you helped one another in difficult times. Like I said, I was brought up on the high street. I lived opposite a pub. It was noisy at night, but it was one of those things, you know, we were, like I say, we were all in the same boat. When I was 9, times were hard. I would say father had died when I was young, and 3 of my other brothers, they were older than me, that was Ernie, Sidney and David. They went to a home down in Weymouth, and I was in 1947 in November. I was sent to Torquay to an orphanage which was run by Sisters of Charity. It was a Catholic organisation, mostly for orphans. Some of the children there had parents. I was one of the lucky ones that had a mother and a family. There were about 90 of us there. There were 2, there were the seniors and there were the infants. The infants were up to the age of 7 and the seniors were from 9 up to about 15. Obviously I was on the older side. My earliest memory of going there was we went on the train. I didn't realise where I was going. It was just a bit of a holiday or something like that to start with. When we got there, I realised it was a bit different. And in those days, pyjamas didn't exist. I didn't have pyjamas. We slept in our underpants and vests, or shirt, whichever the case may be. Naturally enough, I must have been packed with some pyjamas. I didn't know I'd had them, so when it was time to go to bed, I went to bed in my normal clothes, and everybody sort of laughed at me and said, what are you going to bed like that for? I said, well, that's what we normally do. So I was a bit of a laughing stock for that. My first memory of, one of the first memories I had there was the food. We used to dine in what was called a refectory, which was obviously a name term for a dining room. One of the first meals I had was something called macaroni cheese. Macaroni cheese, I'd never heard of macaroni cheese. I took a bit of a taste of it and thought, don't know, I didn't really fancy that. So I thought, well, I won't eat that. That'll be fine, they'll give me something else. The meal was over, and the evening meal was over. It was taken away, nothing else was offered. Fair enough, I went for breakfast. The dormitories, there were 3 dormitories. I was in the end dormitory with about 15 other boys of the 3rd, smaller dormitory. They were up on the 2nd floor of the house that we were in. And the wash basins and the toilets were on the same. The toilets were on the same level as we were, but the wash basins were up another flight of stairs on the 3rd floor. They had bathrooms. There were, I think there were 5. I'm pretty sure there were 5 bathrooms. Saturday was bath day. You took it in turns to bath, and they changed the water after every 5 boys. So it was run by the nuns. There was a curtain that was sort of half pulled across, so it was pretty discreet. But that was the way it was done. Getting back to the macaroni cheese, the next morning I went for breakfast, and put before me was macaroni cheese. I thought, oh dear, that's no good. I don't like that. I shan't eat that, so I didn't eat it. And nothing happened. It was taken away. I had nothing. The next meal, macaroni cheese, and I thought, well, I'd better try it now. So I ate macaroni cheese, and thenceforward I liked it. But in the orphanage, it was run by nuns. There was one lady assistant, Miss, I'm trying to think of her name now. Can't think of her name. It may come to me one time. But she was fine.
Okay.
Yeah. Referring back to Torquay, we had different chores to do in Torquay. Different boys had different things to do. If you were caught talking in the refectory, you had to do washing up. Now, thinking about it, at the time, it did seem to be a bit of a chore. But in reality, it was a good thing to do, because quite often, as in any large family, when you're talking somewhere around about 50 or 60 boys dining at one time, there's always food that's not used. Um, so if you got talking, you had to do the washing up. So when you did the washing up, tea was served from a big urn. So there was always plenty of cold tea, which you could warm up, and there was always some odd half slices of bread or bits and pieces that were available. So you could have some extra ration by doing the washing up. So that wasn't a bad thing to do. As I said, it was run by nuns. Quite often I worked in the kitchen, and the nuns didn't have any special food compared to what we had. I'm talking, as I say, 1947. It was well after the war, I accept that, but food was still hard to come by. It was lots of things were still on ration. And a place like St Vincent's relied a lot on charitable organisations. They used to have a flag day every year to raise funds, and they had lots of benefactors. But the nuns, as I say, I think there were 15 nuns that ran the orphanage, and the main one that ran most of the boys was called Sister Monica. She was the one that did the first aid, but she was the one that was most useful with the boys, if you know what I mean. She had more contact with the boys than anybody else. The nun that ran the refectory was Sister Frances. Of course, teenagers, boys, they used to call her Franny the Witch. It's horrible, really, to think back, but at the time, she was a good nun. Because if you clean the refectory once a week on a Saturday, the refectory had to be completely cleaned out. And obviously, it was all the floors, there were wooden floors. And in those days, all the tea was made with tea leaves. Tea bags didn't exist. And all tea leaves were saved because old damp tea leaves were good to sweep wooden floors. So all the tea leaves were saved, and every weekend all the floors in the convent were cleaned with wet tea leaves and a brush to clean all the dirt up, and it kept the dust down. So it served two purposes. But when we cleaned the refectory on a Saturday, she often used to have an odd sweet or two to give around. So, we would call her Franny the Witch, but it was a bit unkind really, because she was quite a nice nun really. I was brought up as a Catholic, so I served, obviously it was a Catholic organisation run by nuns, so we used to go to church every Sunday. There was a local parish priest, a couple of parish priests that used to come in and do the services on a Sunday. I served as an altar boy. I also sang in the school, in the choir, which was situated above the main church. It was only a small choir. It housed about 12 boys and an organ. In Torquay, as I said before, there were about 70 boys in one section and roughly about 20 or 30 in the other, in the infants. The age group was up to 7, where they separated from one age to the other, from one group to the other. They had their own chapel attached to the home, which was attended by a local priest, a couple of local priests from the local churches in Torquay. And of course, being as it was run by Sisters of Charity, it was a Catholic home, and obviously most of the boys were Catholics, or I presume they were all Catholics, I don't know, but we all went to church anyway. They had a choir, and I was in the choir. I was obviously someone who had a voice, as probably lots of other boys did as well. There were 12 of us, approximately 12 of us in the choir, and we used to do a practice about once a week, once a fortnight, depends. The choir obviously was based above at the top of the chapel, looking down at the altar and over the congregation, which obviously was the boys and the nuns. One of the sisters used to play the organ. The organ itself was the old-fashioned type. There was a handle on one end, and you had to pump the bellows up and down. You knelt on a chair and pumped the bellows up and down. Obviously, boys, as boys will be boys. Sometimes, when it was your turn, you deliberately slowed the pumping down a little bit till the organ started to fade a bit, and then you had a glare from the nun, and you pumped like mad to get it back up again. But that's, as I say, that's one of the boys' pranks that we used to do. That aside, I also served on the altar as an altar boy, and well, that was a normal thing that we all, most of the boys had a go at that. You dressed up with your cassock and cotter, two of you, and you took your turns at serving at the altar with the priest. That was always on a Sunday. Obviously, Mass was on a Sunday. Sometimes there were some holy days during the year when you had to have services as well. So it all sort of tied in together. The religious side of it didn't continue in the home itself. It was confined solely to when you went to church. So there was no sort of religious, should we say, what's the word I'm looking for? No religious inclinations when you were on a normal day. A normal day consisted of you were woken up roughly about 7 o'clock in the morning, getting on for 7 o'clock. You went up to the washroom. There was obviously only cold water to wash in. The washroom itself, there were foot baths, and there were some, maybe I would think, about 30 hand basins with taps on. Yeah, about 30. It was on the next level up from where I was in the dormitories. And you had a cold water wash, and you cleaned your teeth. Sometimes you used salt, sometimes there was some toothpaste. It depends on what was available. The toothpaste itself is in a round little flat tin. It was called McLean's. It's not something I don't know if you can still get it today, but it was a little round flat tin. Otherwise, used some salt, which obviously wasn't very tasty, but there it is. It was what it was. After that, it was down to the refectory. Everybody went down to the refectory for breakfast. Before that, your beds were pulled back. They weren't made, they were all pulled back so that you could see if you'd been naughty and wet the beds, because obviously some of the boys had an accident sometimes, and it happened, one of those things, I suppose, with youngsters. And for breakfast, it was normally you may have a cereal of some sort, but quite often it was something called fried bread, which was bread that was spread with a dripping type thing and then baked in the ovens on a large tray. There would be perhaps she would say there'd be about 20 piles of about 6 in each pile, and you had 3 each on the plate, and that was it. Or perhaps you had bread, and the bread itself was cut on machine in a little bakery, and they never served crusts. The crust were always kept for a later occasion, which I will explain later. The margarine, it never had butter, the margarine was put through a little machine, and it came out in little knobs about the size of a thimble, and you had 3 slices of bread and 3 of these little knobs of margarine, which obviously a knob of margarine didn't really spread on the bread, but it was what it was. As I said, if you were caught talking, obviously you were in the washing up line, which was a good thing, because there was always extra bread or extra bits and pieces to be had that somebody had left behind, so you got extra rations that way. After that, when I first went to Torquay, the school was in-house. Some of the older boys had started to go to a school which was about a mile away called Abbey Road, which was a Catholic school, and attached was also a Catholic church. As I said, it was only the sort of the 12, 13 and 14-year-olds that went to that to start with. The others we were taught in-house with the nuns. So your day was doing lessons. They taught you your lessons the same as you would do in a normal class. Obviously you didn't have to do homework, because that didn't exist when you were in a home, not in an orphanage. Lunchtime was not much of an occasion, but tea time, it was a similar sort of thing as breakfast. The boys would come home and tea time would be about 5:30. The boys would come home from the school, who'd been down to Abbey Road, and the same routine. You might have, like I said, that first night of it, macaroni cheese. You have a variety of things for tea. Sometimes nothing very exciting, and quite often the 3 slices of bread with a knob of marge and some butter, some jam or paste or something similar to that. After that, it was playtime. You'd go back down to the lower floor where you had a large playroom, and we could play there. And then you would be going to bed roughly about 7:30, 8 o'clock, something like that. As I said, there were 3 dormitories. I was in the far dormitory with about a dozen beds, and the middle dormitory had a lot more, and the larger dormitory had the bulk of the beds, somewhere around about 40 beds in there. And the nun that was was the monitor for us. She had her own cubicle at the end, and also there was a toilet at the very end of the large dormitory, so that if you wanted to go to the toilet at night, then obviously you could go there rather than go downstairs and outside. That was a normal day. After I'd been there a couple of years, or a year or so, I was able to go down to Abbey Road School. As I said, gradually over the years, more and more children went there. They reduced the age when you could go. And I think I'd been there about 12 months or so, and then that was my opportunity to go to Abbey Road. So we all got into line and 2 abreast, and we walked a mile to school and back every day. At the school, we had a light lunch, which was good. It was a bit better than what they had in the home. When we got back from school, and also the boys that had been in house all the time, they had, when you came back, you were handed what was called a nobby. And they were the crusts of bread that were cut off the loaves in the bread machine, but as I said, the crusts were not served, they were kept, and they were called nobbies, and you had a nobby when you came home from school. It was dry, but it was food. That was what you had before tea time, so that's what happened to the crust. We all had different chores to do in Torquay. There was a boot room, there was a washroom, there was the work to do in the kitchens, like peeling potatoes, getting vegetables ready. There was floors to be cleaned, so toilets to be cleaned. There was all different jobs, and we all took our turns doing different things. As I said, they had their own laundry, so they had a complete a nun that ran the laundry. They had the big machines for doing the washing. They had the big airing machines and the irons and everything. So everything was done in house. Nothing was sent out. All the bed linen, all the clothes were all done in house. One of the best jobs is what I had for a long time was working in a pantry, where you cut the bread and you put the margarine through the machine to make the little sausages, the little bits of, like I said, about the size of a thimble. That was a good job because while you worked in the pantry, there were normally about 2 or 3 of us. There was always a few crusts that you could put in your pocket. Now, if you had a couple of crusts of bread, that was collateral, that was money. You could swap for marbles, you could swap for a dinky toy, you could, it was something you could barter with. So it gave you a bit of extra something or other. Whatever you with, an extra game or something, or an extra few marbles or whatever. So that was a good job. But as I said, in my time there, I did most of the jobs. But one of my favourite jobs was either working in the pantry or doing the washing up. So I did work in the laundry. I helped in the. Another thing they did, they had their own hens. They had about 30 hens. So occasionally, obviously, we would have eggs. So I helped in the chicken run sometimes. We had our own playground. We had a field at the top where we could play football, and we used to go chasing butterflies and things like that, and play cricket if the weather was permitting. And we also had a large 3-tiered, well, it was made into a 3-tiered. When I first went, it was a long, big slope, but it was made into a 3-tiered playground. The top end was a flower border. The second end was a tarmac with swings on. And then the bottom end was a large play area where you could, there was hoops, car tyres. There was a bicycle that we could take turns on. There was a couple of pairs of roller skates, but you were only allowed to have one roller skate at a time. You couldn't have a pair, so you could only just skate around with one roller skate, and you had to take it in turns anyway. We used to play marbles down there, hopscotch, normal games, chase games. You know, there was a game they used to call I forget. It's probably I've seen it playing on television nowadays. It's where you line up on each side, where you have about half a dozen tennis balls, and you throw them at each other. And as you get hit, you have to leave your side so that you could be just the last man. So you was the last man standing on each side. But yeah, they were pleasant days. The time in Abbey Road, that was good. We used to go out in the morning and do PE. Most weathers in shorts and singlet and plimsolls. It wasn't too comfortable in the winter. It was a bit chilly, but we did sort of go out there perhaps for 20 minutes or whatever. And so school life was fine. While I was there at Abbey Road, I was selected to to go to technical college, which was 13 plus. Myself and another lad. I was one of two of us were the first two ever to be selected, and as it happened, I was the only one that passed to go to technical college in Torquay itself. So obviously it was a great occasion for the orphanage, and I was a bit of a celebrity for a spell. And I had to go down to one of the nuns. I got kitted out with a new uniform. The school was, the technical college was about a mile away, and I used to have tuppence a day. That was a penny bus fare there and a penny bus fare there. But that was too good to miss. I used to walk there and back. A penny lunchtime used to buy me a dandelion and burdock ice lolly, and another penny I could perhaps might get a few sweets or something like that for it. So my time was spent walking backwards and forward to school and hoping it didn't rain too hard. Some of the things we did at Torquay at Christmas time, it was a good time because we'd get invited out to a couple of the big hotels in Torquay. They would have a Christmas party for all the children at the orphanage. So we'd all go there, and we'd have balloons and fancy hats and jelly and ice cream and fancy things. And as we left, we were always given, I should say. There were sweets that were crystallised. They were like slices of peach, slices of fig, and things like that. They were crystallised sweets, and they were quite treasured because they lasted a long time. They were quite chewy. That happened, as I say, a couple of times at Christmas if we were lucky. In the summertime, we used to go down and walk down to the beach at Torbay, and hopefully, occasionally, if we met a benefactor, because obviously being a charitable organisation, the orphanage relied a lot on charitable donations. Also, they used to have a flag day every year to help to raise funds, and it was supported by obviously by the council and by the diocese, local diocese of the Catholic Church. If you met a benefactor, they may buy everyone an ice cream on a rare occasion. When you got to the beach, you were only allowed to go paddling. We were not allowed to go swimming, just paddling, because the nuns obviously couldn't go in the water. They were dressed up in their habits, so you never saw them unless you saw them in their habit. You never saw them any other way whatsoever. Obviously they may have had other clothes to wear, but never saw them. So that was a bit of a treat if you had to go down to the beach sometimes for a walk. Obviously you have to walk with one of the infants, so you never walked with your friends. You walked to one of the kids, as we called them, because obviously you've got about 80 or 90 lads in columns of twos. You've got a long line of children walking along. Occasionally, a couple of times while I was there, once a year, there was one of the Royal Naval ships called the HMS Devonshire used to dock, and lots of the older boys and sort of the boys from about 10 up to 14 were invited to go on board ship. where we all dressed up as pirates, etc. So there was lots of fun and games going on board ship, and there was a few little nibbles and things you could have here and there as well. And that was good fun, obviously, but that only happened about twice while I was there. And the good thing was that when you came away, they used to give you some pennies that were really bright and shiny. I don't know how they do them, I do now, but I didn't know then. They looked like brand new pennies. They was to dip them in some sort of acid of some sort to clean them up, and they looked like gold coins. So you went into the pirate's den, what they call a pirate's den, and it was a bit spooky, and you came out with 2 or 3 coppers, but you had to hand them over to the nuns when you got back, because you weren't allowed to have money. On the subject of money, when I first went there, nobody had pocket money. After I had been there perhaps 2, maybe 3 years, on a Sunday, we always had what's called an assembly in the green room, where the nuns, 2 or 3 of the nuns, especially the Mother Superior and a couple of the other nuns, would be at the main table, and all the boys would be round in the semicircles and round. And anybody who'd been extra naughty had been, sort of said, well, got to be good next time and all this sort of thing. And they started to issue out pocket money, which, if you'd been naughty, you were deducted. The pocket money was about 2p a week to start with. You never had the money, but it was credited to you. And occasionally, obviously, like I said, it was during 1947, it was just after the war, and up to the 50s, most sweets and things were still on rations up to the early 50s. So sweets weren't always available, but when they were available, you could buy perhaps 3 or maybe 4 sweets for a penny. So you could use your pocket money to buy some sweets if you'd, been allocated your pocket money and been too naughty. So by the time I'd left, it was up to 4p a week, but that was another story where it gradually increased. But like I said, when I first went there, you never had any money at all. You never actually handled the money. I was one of the luckier ones. I did have a parent and some families, because the majority, I would say about 60%, maybe more than that, of the boys' children that were there, they were orphans, because it was an orphanage, so they had nobody whatsoever. The intention was that once the boys got to about 15, that sort of age, they tried to find foster parents for them, which they were quite successful. It wasn't always perhaps in Torquay. A lot of them were in Torquay. That's where they tried to rehouse lots of the boys in Torquay, because that's if you consider they'd perhaps been there from when they were about 3 or 4, they'd never known anything else but Torquay. So when you've been there from, say, 3 to about 15, you sort of counted it as home. So when I was about 14, that became more and more popular. More and more of the boys were being farmed out, should we say, to foster parents. When I was 15, we were used to be going out to not foster parents, but to people that were perhaps they were foster parents, I don't really know, but they were having perhaps 3 or 4 boys in for a day at a time to get them used to being with a family life, if you know what I mean, rather than actually taking you in. You were there for perhaps best part of a day to get some idea of what family life would be like, because obviously if you only lived as an orphanage, you wouldn't know what family life was like. So I went to one of those homes for maybe half a dozen times over the period of the 12 months. And then one day I was told that I was being sent to Weymouth, which obviously was about 30 miles from Poole, where I came from originally, to a foster parent in Weymouth. They were called the Rossons, and they lived in Glendenning Avenue. I didn't know that when I left, but I was put on a train and I was met at Weymouth by this couple, and they were very nice people. They already had another lad there. I can't think of his name at the time. He was there for, I suppose, about 4 months, then he moved on, but he was younger than I was. And Fortunately, my sister Dorothy, who was in Warwickshire, she was brought down, and she stayed with us for with Ross and Linda and Andrew. Stayed with us for about 12 months or so, I suppose. While I was in Weymouth, unbeknown to me, obviously, like I said, my three of my older brothers had been put into a home in Weymouth, just the other side of Weymouth. And one of them had got married to a local Weymouth girl, David, and the oldest of the three brothers had got married to a Weymouth girl, and they lived over at, I can't think where it is now, they lived on the outskirts of Weymouth. And the middle brother of the three, I didn't know at the time, had an accident when he was at the home on his, I think it was on his birthday. I've got the paperwork, and I'll get it out sometime. And he'd cut his wrist, put his fist through a window, and they weren't able to save him. So unfortunately he died, which I didn't know about until, like I said, after I'd been down in Weymouth some time. And my other brother, Ernest, the younger of the three, who was the next age, between me and my sister Dorothy, he was the next brother up from me. Obviously my sister Dorothy was in between age-wise. And he came to see me after I'd been there a few months, and gradually I was permitted to go over and visit the Apsleys, who were the family that my brother David had married into. And quite often I used to go over there on a Saturday, and then I started to be able to go to watch Weymouth play football down at the Weymouth Stadium, because they used to play Weymouth, play football, and the family used to go and support them, so I got to go to the football quite often. Also, when I was there, I got my first bicycle. They bought me a bicycle. It cost them 10 shillings. And I also started fishing down at Stone Pier, down in the Weymouth Harbour. So that was, I was getting back to being a normal life then. Also, while I was there, with the, like I said, with the other lad that was still there, I had a bike. We tried to cycle to Weymouth, from Weymouth to Poole one day, but we didn't quite get there. We got as far as Wareham, and we had to turn back, because I was going to try to cycle home to see Mother, but I didn't quite make it. But my sister then left, and they fostered then two other young girls that came. They were, I suppose they would be about 6 years old. And I suppose about 3 or 4 months after they came, I was finally, because I'd been with the Rossens for about 12 months by then, 12 months or so, and I was finally back home with Mother. So I was to start to get back to where I started from, at home. As I said before, from 9 to 14, I was in Torquay. There was, as I said, some perhaps 70, 80, 90 children there. About 60% or 60 of them, I would say, were orphans. The rest had some relative, maybe some had two parents, I don't know. I was one of the lucky ones. I had a family, all right, all being only a mother, but I had a family of brothers and sisters. So I was able to get mail, and occasionally I was able to write a letter. The mail was always opened before I got it. There was never any money sent, because that was not allowed. And any mail that I wrote, when I was allowed to write, was always monitored, and what I said had to be certain things. I couldn't say certain things. I couldn't say anything that was sort of detrimental, if you know what I mean. Not that I would anyway. But and occasionally, especially at Christmas, we used to wait up in the bedrooms and to see if the postman would come with parcels and letters, because obviously that was exciting at Christmas. And I was one of the lucky ones that would have a parcel at Christmas. We'd have sweets in there, a few books, and perhaps an odd game or two. The disappointing part about it at the time was that whatever came in the parcel, you didn't get it all, because obviously some kids had nothing at all. So the nuns and obviously benefactors used to donate things and local charities so that everybody had something at Christmas, albeit only perhaps one or two small things. So obviously, if you had two or three packs of sweets, one would disappear. You were aware of it, but there wasn't much. When you think back about it now, it made sense because obviously you were getting something and somebody else had nothing at all. So it was disappointing at the time, but when I look back at it now, I think, oh well, so at least I had something and I had someone, and some of the children had nobody at all. So that's what it is. Um, Birthdays, I didn't always get a parcel, but I always got letters. Well, I suppose I must have, if I think about it, I probably had maybe 3 letters a year from home, and I probably wrote maybe 3 back, not a lot. Um, I remember one particular instance because my eldest brother Fred, he's 11 years older than I am, and I recall that when they got married, they had a daughter, and I was 11 years old. So I'm 11 years older than she is. So that's one thing that sticks in my mind. My eldest brother is 11 years older than me, and the eldest granddaughter, or my eldest cousin, I should say, she's 11 years younger than I am. Her name is Susan Cox. So that's one thing that I can always sticks in my mind from Torquay. That letter was an exciting letter because there was someone that I'm an uncle. I'm an uncle at last. Um, as I said, there were occasional days when perhaps it was a special feast day of one of the nuns, sisters and nuns, and they would perhaps do something a little bit special, try to make a few extra, make a few cakes or something like that. But really, life was, well, it's pretty mundane, really. I suppose. I wouldn't say I wouldn't say it was exciting, but we were, like I say, we were all in the same boat. So there were. I don't recall being many fights. I do recall a couple of boys run away on different occasions, but they never got very far. They perhaps gone away for a day and they were brought back. So I suppose that's youngsters for you. It never occurred to me to run away, but as I say, it's some of them. Two of them. Well, no, at least two of them. And I know at least 2 boys died while I was there. One died of pneumonia, and one died when he had appendix. He had appendicitis. He didn't recover. But that's in those days, those sort of operations and those sort of illnesses, you didn't have such an opportunity or the chance to survive as you do today. Because when I was a kid, infant mortality was pretty high. It was nowadays you can get babies that weigh a couple of pounds and they survive and grow to normal people, whereas when I was young, that small, you didn't have much chance. Another thing I remember too when I was very young, when I was one of my brother next to me, John, when someone died when I was young, before the funeral, the coffin was brought to the house and it was open, and the neighbours and friends could come and see the body before it went to be buried, which obviously they don't do that today. And also, when the funeral took place, as the coffin and in the hearse went up the high street, everybody would stop and all the men would take their hats off while the hearse and all the cortege drove up the high street. It's not something that happens today. People are not quite so polite with weddings, with funerals, I should say. But that was the norm when I was a boy. Everybody stopped and paid their respect. As I said earlier, I was in Torquay from 9 to 14. As I said, there were some maybe 80 or 90 children there. And I would say about 60 of them probably were orphans, complete orphans, no parents at all. The others perhaps had one or two parents. I was one of the fortunate ones. I had a mother and a large family of sorts. Consequently, at Christmas time, we used to gather round up in the bedrooms, quite a few of us, and wait for the postman to come to see if he was called, because obviously he would be bringing parcels and mail for the fortunate ones that had family. And I was one of the fortunate ones that had it. The bad news was that whatever you had in your parcel, some of it disappeared. By that, it was taken away if you had perhaps 2 or 3 lots of sweets and perhaps 2 or 3 books and perhaps a couple of games. 1 or 2 items would be taken from each particular parcel to make up a parcel for some of the less fortunate children who, as I said, were complete orphans. Having said that, they would be having some things because they were obviously benefactors, and the local charities would be sending things up so that all the children had something, whatever, however small it was. Another thing was I was able to have mail, and I used to have, as I say, perhaps maybe 3 letters a year, and I was able to write letters, which I was not that keen to do, but was thought the right thing to do, to reply. So I perhaps wrote 3 letters a year back home. The letters were opened before you got them to make sure there was no money in them, because that was not allowed. And obviously what you wrote was monitored, and you were put in the right direction of what to write, so you never wrote anything detrimental. Also, at Christmas time, there were a couple of local hotels. I think the Queen Hotel was one of them. I can't remember the name of the other one. They would have what's called a Christmas party for all the children, and you'd all go there on the selected day, normally a weekend, perhaps on the Sunday, and you'd sit down to jelly and ice cream and some sandwiches and fancy cakes, and play some games, and there was balloons and funny hats to wear and things like that, and then party games like pass the parcel and musical chairs and things, normal kids games. And when it was time to go, you were handed what they used to call crystallised fruits. They were slices of peaches and figs and oranges that had been sugar coated and crystallised, which were good. You only had perhaps 2 or 3, but they would last a long time because they were quite chewy. Another thing was that sometimes in the summer, there was one of the naval boats called the HMS Devonshire would come into the harbour, and some of the older boys from 10 years upwards would be invited on board for a fun day, Pirates Day. They used to rig the ship out in pirates gear and make lots of fun and game things for you to do in that, and lots of nibbles here and there you could have. And also you went through the pirates there at the end, and they gave you some coins which looked like gold coins, but they were pennies that had been dipped in some sort of solution to make them all nice and shiny like gold, which when you got back to the home you had to hand them in because you weren't allowed to have money. One of the things that happened when we were young was that Mother, was one of the things that she used to be able to do, was to lay bodies out. So people would knock on the door and say, "Is Kit there?" And that was Mother's short name for Kitty. And she would go to someone's house and lay a body out, which meant that she would prepare it ready for when the funeral director came. And for that she got 2 and 6pence or half a crown or 12.5p in today's money. So that was something that Mother could earn money from. Another thing Mother earned money from was that she had a peddler's license, which means that she was able to sell things out on the road or in the street. The thing that she used to make, there were people with photographs used to bring her a photograph about the size of a normal postcard, shall we say. somewhere around about 3 inches by about 5 inches. She would have some pieces of clear glass cut. I would be, or one of the boys or myself would go up to one of the old shoe shops and get the cardboard boxes that the shoes came in. Mother would cut the cardboard out to the same size as the glass and the picture, and then she would stick pins in the corner and then use silk to make a framework around the glass to make it into a framed picture, and stick another bit of cardboard on the back as a stand, and she would do that, and she would earn perhaps a shilling, or or maybe a 1 in 6 for doing something like that. Going back to laying out the bodies, when we were young, I can clearly remember that when one of my brothers died, John, I would be about 8, I suppose. In those days, the coffin on the very last day was often laid out in the front room and left open so that people or relatives could come and pay their last respects before the body went to the cemetery for burial. On the day of the burial, the undertaker would come, the coffin would be taken out, put on the hearse, and people would walk up the high street. The hearse would go very slow all the way up the high street, and as it passed people by, the gentlemen would normally take their caps off and stand while the cortege passed through up the high street, which was the normal practice in those days. Obviously today, things are different. I can clearly remember that when my mother died, we left the church in 2 or 3 cars, and by the time we got to Oakdale to get to the cemetery, the corsage was separated by several other cars, simply because in today's society there's not the same respect for funerals as there used to be when we were young. But that's the way life changes, I suppose, so you have to accept that. Another thing that I can remember Mother used to do, we used to take in washing from 1 or 2 other people in the high street. In particular, one particular customer was called Jinx Miller. They lived about 2 doors down in a shop, and on a Monday, Mother would boil the copper up, which was up in the back of the yard, and do the washing. And I, in turn, after school, when I came home, would work the handle on the mangle, so that you didn't have washing machines in those days. You had you boiled it up in a copper and did it on a washboard, and then you rinsed everything out, and then you put it through a mangle, which was a contraption with big wooden rollers with a handle to squeeze all the water out. And after that, the stuff was put to dry as best you could, and then when it came to the ironing, when we lived in the high street, obviously with a large family, the gas stove we had about 6 rings on top of it. So Mother could put 3 or 4 irons, flat irons. They were a piece of flat steel with a handle on that you put a cloth round to hold the handle because they got hot, and you put them on the gas to warm them up, and then you use the hot iron to iron the clothes. And then I would, when the ironing was finished, sometime during the week, I would go down to the particular to Jinxie Miller's or wherever it was, and I would take a big armful of washing, sort of down to my arms and up to my neck somewhere, and knock on the door, and I would say that would be a shilling or 1 in 6, and he would say, how much? And I would say, well, Mother said, that much, but it was always a bit of an argument, but they normally paid up, and that was another way that Mother could make some money. Life, it was much the same. All the kids were much the same. We all chipped in, and we all did things, and life was much the same for everybody. I mean, I used to play in the high street as a kid. I used to play marbles up and down the gutter in the high street. I used to play whip and top, and I used to play hoops. And I spent a lot of time down the quay a lot of time over Hammerley. I mean, when it was holiday time, you were out all day, nobody bothered you. You come home when it got dark. So there was no sort of worry about anybody. Everybody was quite safe. You didn't have any worry about people. Well, like there are today, there was no, shall we say, no kidnappers or anything like that about. I mean, life was just a happy situation back in those days. When I'd moved to Weymouth, my brother, three up from me, had got married, and it was then that I learnt that the brother in between had died. Ernie contacted me, and I was able to go and visit my brother that was married. I lived over at Radical Way, and I quite often used to go over there and visit them, like, so that sort of kept me a bit more in contact with the family. And then my sister, she was moved down, and she was fostered in the same family in Glendenning Road with the Rossons. And I spent, I would think, about 12, 15, 18 months there, perhaps, all told. They were happy times. They were a nice family. They were good to me. They bought me my first bike, actually. It cost 10 shillings. It was only a second-hand bike, and it was bought in Weymouth. But it was, it was a great thing for me to have my own bike. Good grief! It was there that I started to do fishing down at the Stone Pier down at Weymouth. Fair enough, we only caught small crabs and wrasse and fish like that, but it was exciting. And with the other lad that I used to go with, we had a good time. A couple of times I cycled over to Portland Bill, and I climbed up Pulpit Rock, which is a rock that juts out. You have to jump across to get onto it, and then there's footholds and handholds to climb up it. And I've also fished off the top of Pulpit Rock with a hand line to caught wrasse. Portland was roughly about 12-mile cycle ride, but it was fun. Me and the other lads used to do that. Also, I was attending technical college when I was in Weymouth, so that was handy. Can't think now, just holding it. Moved back when I was about 15 to 15 and a half. I was informed that I would be moving back home again to my normal home in Poole, which obviously was a happy day. Arriving back in Poole, I decided that it was time to get a job. I was still attending the college down in Weymouth, because obviously I had to be there till I was 16. I had a train pass, so that I was able to travel backwards and forwards. I had to catch a train around about 7 o'clock in the morning to go to Weymouth, and I never got home in the evening till around about 6 o'clock in the evening every day. So that was my that was my school days for 12 months, going backwards and forwards to Weymouth. Having said that, with the train pass I had, you could use it for during the holidays or any time. So if you wanted to go to Weymouth, you could hop on the train with your train pass. I sat my mock exams, and it was informed that it was doubtful, unless I put a bit more attitude to it, that I'd be wasting my time. So I decided that by the time I was 16, I would not take my school certificates. I decided I would leave and look for employment. At that time, work was easy to find. Jobs were plenty. You could get a job almost anywhere, in a shop, in a factory, whatever you wanted. There was plenty of opportunities. One thing I did do, there was an exam going for an apprenticeship over in the Royal Cordite factory over at Holton Heath. So I put my name forward and was invited to attend to do this examination. Having arrived at Holton Heath at the Cordite factory, there were about 36 of us sitting this exam. I sat the exam along with the other lads, and several weeks later I was informed that I was in the top 4 in the exam, and if I wanted to do an apprenticeship at Holton Heath, then all was well, I could do that. The apprenticeship was in the machine shop, learning to be a machinist. So I took the opportunity to attend the opportunity to be invited to take up this post, and I was informed that the pay would be £1.10 a week. At the time, there was also an employment available up in the Cordite factory as an office boy to learn to be a storehouseman. That was paying £2 4 shillings a week, which was a shilling an hour for a 44-hour week. So as mother was sort of relying on me to go to work to help to have some income, the 30 shillings didn't sound quite so interesting, even though it was an apprenticeship, whereas the £2 4 shillings sounded very attractive. So I opted for the Cordite factory rather than the apprenticeship. Whether it was the right decision, I'll never know, but that's what I did at the time. Of the 44 shillings, 3 and 4 pence went for national insurance stamp, which was half the price of an adult. And that left me with £2 and the rest of the change, of which £1 went to mother and left me with the other for my wages for the week. Of my £1 that I had left, the rail fare, I had to go to Holton Heath. The bicycle that I'd had down Weymouth wasn't suitable for anything particular. It was a bit of a rundown bike, so it stayed at Weymouth when I left. So I had to travel on the train to Holton Heath, and there was a workers' train that left every day from Poole to Holton Heath and returned every evening. And the weekly return fare was 10 shillings. So of my £1, I was down with 50 pence or 10 shillings. After 2 or 3 months of doing that, I thought to myself, well, I don't know, this is not very exciting, this on the train business. I'm going to have to get another bicycle. So I, down the end of the high street, there was a cycle shop. So I went down to the cycle shop and inquired about a new bicycle. A new bicycle was £26 at the time, of which I was only having £1 a week, or 10 shillings, whichever way you looked at it, available. So my eldest brother Fred said he would be guarantor to do HP. So my 10 shillings that I spent on the train fare was my weekly payment for my bicycle, which was a racing bike. And thereafter I cycled to Holton Heath every day until eventually, after some 50 weeks of paying 10 shillings, the bike was mine. One thing I did do, I'd had the bike a few months and I thought, well, this is good, I'll give it a good clean, etc. So I started taking it to pieces, took all the derailleur gears off, and guess what? I couldn't put it back together again. I proudly walked down to the shop and said to the chap in the cycle shop, help. Thereafter, I was a bit more careful with trying to maintain my bicycle. He'd put it back together for me. But Working at the factory, there were two other apprentices, a chap called Ivor Franklin and a chap called Roger Webber. We were all three apprentices working in the office. My first ever job in the office was on a switchboard, which was the one where you push the cords in and pull a lever and turn the handle to ring the extension. The extensions were around the main office in the office building where I worked. If you wanted to get an outside call, if you wanted to ring Poole, or if you wanted to ring Bournemouth, or if you wanted to ring Salisbury or somewhere else, you rang the exchange and asked them for an extension. And then they would put you for an extension, and then you would be able to put the caller through to that extension. The first thing you did, you asked the caller in the office, was it a private call or was it a business call? If it was a private call, when you rang the operator in Poole, you said, I would like to ring a number at so-and-so and so-and-so, ADC. Now, ADC meant advised duration and charge. So the lady would know in the exchange that it was a private call, and she would then ring me back after the call had been made sometime later, perhaps 10, 15 minutes later, and say, the call you made to Weymouth or the call you made to Southampton was 1 shilling and fourpence or whatever the price it would be. So then that was charged to the particular person in the office who'd made that call. But I feel pretty certain that a lot of office people, they made personal calls and said it was business calls, but that's another story. But yeah, the office was a nice job, and one of the jobs that you did in the office, you went round to all the offices and you had a big like a basket type thing, and you went to one office and you took all the papers from the out tray, sorted through and took them to the next office or the other offices and sorted out to people's in trays and took their out trays. You did that a couple of times a day. Round the factory itself, there was a works department. There was a goods inwards department. There was a surgery department. There was a police department. There were several different departments. So you had a messenger bike, and a couple of times during the day you'd load up your basket and go around and do the rounds down the outskirts as well, which was right if it was sunny, but if it was a bit wet, it was a bit different because you you had some wet weather clothing, but it wasn't very comfortable. But yeah, that's my life in the Cordite factory was good. The best part was when you worked up in the general stores. I worked up in the general stores after I'd been up in the offices for about 6 months. You went to different departments. I worked down in the goods inwards. I worked down in the stores. And then, like I said, in the factory stores. Being a large factory, there were some, perhaps, maybe 1,500, 2,000 people worked in the Cordite factory. They used to make a rocket propellant for to fire the guns on the big battleships and the cruisers, the 14 and 24-inch guns. It was a Cordite was a rocket propellant that you used to fire the actual shell out of the gun. So you ignited the Cordite and it exploded and threw the shell out of the muzzle and at the target, another ship or wherever you were firing at. The Cordite was made in different bays, and each bay was protected by a big mound of earth, so that if there was an explosion in one of them, it didn't affect the other parts, the other bays where the Cordite was being made. Because obviously, when you worked in the Cordite area, you had to wear special clothing, and you had to put special shoes over your shoes, overshoes with felt overshoes that you had to wear to walk around in the Cordite area itself. During that time, when I first started work, I used to work at a fish shop down the bottom of the high street called Dibbins. When I was a kid, they were there then as a fish shop, and I used to be able to see salt fish hanging outside. It's not a thing that you see today, but it was fish that had been salted, dried, and it was preserved, which meant that it would keep for some time. I used to work there on a Saturday afternoon to help to clean the shop and to clean out afterwards, and then we'd go in and collect some swill from some of the other local shops around, and we'd take it up to Gurley's farm where she used to keep some pigs. For that work I used to get half a crown, 2 and 6pence, or 12.5p in today's money, and so I would be starting there roughly about 1 o'clock or 2 o'clock in the afternoon and finishing somewhere about 6 o'clock in the evening for the money. And if I was lucky, on a Sunday, she would invite me to also clean the company's vehicles, which were a couple of vans and a couple of cars owned by the family, for which I got another couple of bob, or 10 pence in today's money. One of the other things I used to do at Christmas time, towards about November onwards, being a shop that sold fish and farm, like ducks and chickens and things like that, they sold other things as well as fish. They used to have people in to pluck chickens, for which you got a penny a time for plucking a chicken. They came in crates with about 12 chicken in, so you put your hand in, grabbed a chicken, and did a quick few plucks on the chest, on the breast of the chicken, to see if it was a young one or an older one. If it was a bit tough, you stuffed it back in and grabbed another one, a bit quick. If it started to pluck easy, you give it a quick neck stretch, and away you went. You mostly did just the breast and slightly towards the edge of the wings, because there was a machine that used to do the wing feathers. To pluck them, you put them onto a machine and it just plucked the wing feathers out, because obviously they're quite hard. If you think of a bird, the wing feathers are quite stiff to pull out. So, but the breast feathers are quite easy to pull out. So I used to get a penny a time for plucking chickens, so I could be earning money doing that as well. Not a lot, but it was money to be earned. It was about that sort of time, after I'd been working. I used to I used to cycle to work with a couple of friends of mine who started to work at the same time as me at the cordite factory. A chap called Ivor Franklin and a chap called Roger Webber. Roger, he used to live down at Whitecliff, but Ivor, he lived down at just the other side of Tattenham. And we used to cycle together, and we would meet up at Upton. I would cycle from Poole, and he would cycle up round the Fleece Bridge way, and we'd meet at Upton, and then we'd cycle on into work together. And I would say Roger used to go by other means, he used to go by train. Roger, he was a keen cadet in the Air Force. His ambition was always to be in the Air Force, whereas Ivor and I, we didn't have any particular ambition at all. We were both working in the cordite factory up in the office. Well, the three of us were working in the office actually. And as I said before, we did different areas of the factory as a messenger. And after some time, Roger, he tried to get into the RAF, but he was, as a non-commission, he wanted to go into non-commission if he could, but he was rejected because of he wore glasses. So, and the strange part about it was, when he was called up for national service, he was accepted for national service. So he went in and did national service, which was a bit of a disappointment to him, because he didn't want to be doing it that way. But having said that, there it is, that's life. I went for my national service. I went for a medical in Southampton, and after I'd been there, they give you a train pass to go to Southampton, and you also were given the ability to buy a meal. You were given some allowance to buy a meal at lunchtime. There were about a dozen of us went up from Poole, different friends. We arrived, obviously went through the normal routine and stripped off, weight, height, medical sort of things. Went out for lunch, so we thought, well, we're on expenses, we'll have ourselves a nice meal, so we bought a steak. Somewhere around about 6 or 7 shillings in money in those days. went back in the afternoon. In the afternoon, we did all the physical stuff. In the morning, it was a case of try to get you to sign on to do perhaps 9 years, 22 years, or whatever, to make a career with the army, which I declined. I was quite happy to do as my brothers had done before me. Some of my other brothers had done the 2 years national service. After the day had finished, we were sent to another room to collect our expenses. So I went to the table and I presented my piece of paper with the receipt for the meal, and he said, "Where'd you come from?" I said, "Poole." So he said, "Half a crown, or 2 and 6, which is 12.5p in today's money." I said, "But," he said, "you come from Poole." I said, "Yeah." He said, "Half a crown, mate. Get on with it." Consequently, out of pocket, but a lesson learned. Thought we'd pull a fast one. Didn't work. But having said that, I didn't pass for my army medical because I have dry skin. It's a type of eczema, and at that particular time they were easing back on national service, and I was put on the reserve list till I was 38, which meant that had there been a conflict or a war, I could have been called up as a reserve, but that didn't happen. It was about that time in 1957 that I used to belong to the Catholic Church. They used to have a youth club in one of the local halls in Poole, and you could play badminton, billiards and darts and things like that in the youth club on certain days. And we were holding a St. Patrick's dance on this particular time, and obviously I'm not a dancer, I never was, but I saw this nurse. There was some nurses had come to the dance from the Poole Hospital, and I got talking to one of them, and I decided, asked her if I could walk her home, and that's how I first met my wife. Strangely enough. We saw each other on and off, and obviously she saw some different lads and I saw some different girls, but over a couple of years. But eventually we got together, and here we are today. But we'd been seeing each other on and off for some time, and my brother, Ernest, next brother up from me, he was off to going to work in London. He wanted to go and live in London. He'd been there and trained in Sainsbury's as a what's the word I'm looking for, in the grocery department, where they did the butter and the meat and the bacon and things like that. And he was going up to London. He sort of mentioned, would I like to go with him? So I thought, well, yeah, let's go to London. So we decided we'd move to London, and we went up to London and landed at Waterloo. And he knew a young lady who lived in Harrow, up that way. So we decided to go to Harrow on the Hill, and we moved into a bedsit there with a Mrs. Bennett. And we had to share a bedroom, and it was a time the Manchester Air, the football, when the Manchester United air crash happened. That's about the time that we were in London, because we were actually living at Mrs. Bennett's when that actually happened. The idea was that she fed us with a bed and breakfast, and we paid, and we had to have a bath on a Wednesday. But we had to take it in turns who went first. That was our bath day Wednesday. We just took it in turns from the same bath water, who went first. Retracing back a bit from that particular part, I got a job working. There were several job offers actually. I could have worked for a company who did the sort of things that you do for when you do the toilets. You provide toilet rolls, soap, and those sort of things, replacements for companies that have toilet facilities in factories or companies or whatever the case may be. I forget the name of the company now, but I could have also got a job. Ernie was working in a shop called Goodworth's. He'd got a shop there, and he asked me if I'd like to try there. So I had an offer of the job in the other place, but I said, yeah, I'll come along. So I went along and I saw the manager. A nice chap, he wasn't very tall, I forget his name now, but he said to me, I said, no, I've never done anything like this before. He said, that doesn't matter. He said, can you count? Can you add up? I said, yes. So he got himself a piece of a paper bag, and he wrote on the bag about 10 figures. One's like 11 pence 3 farthings, 6 pence halfpenny, 1 and 4 pence 3 farthings, 1 and a penny farthing, 2 and 6, and about 7 figures. He said, add that up. So I went, wrote the total down. He said, you got the job. He said, I can teach you anything about the job. He said, but if you can't count, it's no good. And the reason why I found out is you can't count. In those days, you had a till that you had to ring up the amount of money. And not as today, you don't do it with a machine that adds up for you. When the person buys half a dozen or 8 or 10 or 4 things, you write the price down on a bag, on the back of a packet of sugar, and you add the figures up, and you give a total, and you tell the person that they spent 8 and 6 pence 3 farthing, for argument's sake, or 2 and 7 pence halfpenny. And then when you go to the till to ring the money up, the most money you can ring up is 5 shillings. So if they spent £1 and 10 pence, for argument's sake, you ring up 5 shillings, 5 shillings, 5 shillings, 5 shillings, and 10 pence. So hence being able to work out numbers and figures and sums. That was the only thing he was concerned with. While I was there, we spent about, I say, getting on for 2 years up in London, getting on that way. I learnt to cut a cheese. In those days, the cheeses were wrapped in a cheesecloth, which you had to scrub. It was like a muslin cloth, because when I was young, cheese came with a rind on, which was a hard outside skin. Today, cheese comes in cellophane packs with no rind on, but the rind was nice to eat. Unfortunately, everybody wanted a piece of cheese without the rind on, but we learnt that you could cut a cheese so that everybody had rind on it. So I learnt to cut a cheese. I also learnt how to bone a side of bacon, which was called a flitch. And then you used to cut it up on the machine. You fed it into the machine, and you cut the rashers off, and they were presented in packs for you to buy as you saw them, rather than already pre-wrapped. Because in those days, the only thing that was pre-wrapped was sugar. Biscuits weren't wrapped. Eggs weren't in boxes. Currants and sultanas, they weren't in packets. They were all in tins. You weighed everything up and put it into a paper bag to provide the customer with. So things have changed since I was in a shop. Also, after I'd moved to London, Margaret moved up to London. She worked as a nanny to a family. So we came in contact with one another again, and after that we both moved back to Paul after a couple of years, and decided then that we'd think about getting married. Right, after coming back to Paul, I got a job working for a company, Decca Records, which incorporated Decca Radar, which was a company, a subsidiary of Decca Radar, of Decca Records, that did copper plating. In other words, you had a stainless steel or a submetal mandrel, and you dipped it into a vat of acid, hang it into a vat of acid with copper anodes and cathodes. One was the anode, one was the cathode. You pass electric current through it, and the copper transfers from the copper anode onto the item that you've got moving about in the acid bath in the middle. It's in there for, depending on how thick you wanted the copper to be, it could be in there from maybe 2 days to 2 weeks, or even longer, depending on how long it wanted to be. The particular job we were working on while I was there was to do with the radar, which they use on ships to see, everybody knows what radar is today. It's what they use it on ships. They use it at airports. You see them going around the big concave screen going around with a thing in the front directing the rays back in. We worked in conjunction with the station over at Windthorpe, which was the nuclear power station at Windthorpe at the time. We worked in conjunction with those, developing the radar system. Another thing that we did at Decca Radar, we used to do the templates for the records. What would happen, they would give you a stainless steel master, and you would plate copper duplicates of it. They would be sent down to the press shop in the record department, and each one, the one that you made, would be back the opposite to what the master was, so that when you pressed it into the plastic, it became what the master was. So that's how they made the records. But we used to do work for Decca and for the radar and for the records as well. So they were part of the same company. I worked at Decca for several years. They then decided that they would, by which time I'd got married, and Decca Radar was going to reconfigure on the Isle of Wight. I was offered a job as a key worker. Several of us were as key workers, but I didn't fancy moving to the Isle of Wight, which was, as it turned out, was a good thing. I mean, we could have gone there and been relocated, expenses would have been paid, house would have been found, could have moved over with the family that we had. But I declined, which was a good thing, because 2 years later, the key workers that had taught the new people over there were all made redundant. It's not a thing they told you at the time, so consequently the people that did relocate were out of a job and struggling to find something to do. We were trying to get back to move back to this area. Whether they ever did or not, I don't know. But all I do know is that after 2 years, I was told that the key workers that did go were made redundant because they trained up the people over there on a cheaper salary. Because as a key worker, you were going to be getting more money. You were going to be training other people to do to learn the techniques that you'd been taught. But that's life. When I first got married, we lived up in Market Street because the hairdresser I used to go to, they owned a house at the top of the Market Street, right next door to the police station and opposite the mortuary. And the lane down between the police station and us was called Love Lane, and the road next to the police station was called Norton Road, and that's where I used to go to the Catholic school when I was a kid, strangely enough. And the school was no longer there, obviously, but that's where I used to go to school. We lived in an upstairs bed set with a bed settee and a kitchen. We had the use of the bathroom on certain days. The bed's settee we had, it was one that it was like a couch. So you lifted the headboard up and you unfolded the bed. Then you put it away every night to make more room. The only trouble was the headboard, if you weren't careful, used to plop down on you. It wasn't secure, wasn't very secure. But it was fine. That's when we had our first child, John, when we lived there. Because after we'd had John for 12 months, obviously our name was on the housing list, and being a local resident and living in the rented accommodation, the points mounted up pretty quickly. So after we'd been there, we had John after we'd been married about 12 months, and it wasn't long after that we moved up to the Waterloo estate. And we managed to get a house simply because Margaret's sister lived on Waterloo estate in Hilborn Road, and the house next door to her became empty, and that's the house that we were allocated, where we subsequently had our other two children, Ian and Andrew.
Where
This
did you
is number 15 High Street, with my earliest memories when I was probably about 4 when my father died. So we lived here for several years, and after we moved from here, we moved up the road to number 28, which used to be a boarding house, a lodging house, where people obviously would pay to stay the night, and it was run by people called the Sharmans, Ma and John Sharman. I forget what the woman's name was, but Mrs. Sharman and Mr. Sharman. Which if you walk a bit further,
Where's that to?
opposite is number 28 High Street, which is accessible by the lane there. There was a front door, but it was never used. It was accessible by the lane there. Margaret remembers the lane, don't you, Margaret?
Yeah, I just said.
Yeah. And up in the garret, we called it garret in those days, an attic. I had one of the rooms up in the attic. There were no fires up there, so go to bed with a candle. Candlestick. This was to be a pub run by the Whittles. Go across there. The door on the side where the snug was, where you could go in and get a jug. They knew who you were. I had to get a jug of mild from Mother on a Sunday and just put the red hot poker in it to make it a bit of a head. So, but you sometimes had to wait before you got served. This cobbler, this is a shoe shop.
Yeah.
The man who ran the shoe shop, he only had one leg, and he had they used to have a part of a tyre around his stump in those days. Where his knee was, he walked with a crutch, but he had a tyre around his knee.
Oh, okay.
But that was a shoe shop. The set shelves was there, that's always been there. Next to it, there was a draper with a step side. Next door was Grittons. That was run by the family called the Grittons. They sold things like, there was a few sweets and a few toffee apples, and they used to sell magazines and things like that. Next door was Jinx Miller's. Mother used to take in washing for Jinxie Miller, because up the back, Mother used to do washing, and I used to have to take the washing into him, and he'd give me the money for it, because I used to say to him, well, perhaps there's 1 and 6 this week. He used to go, how much? I'd say, Mother said 1 and 6, you know. So that's why I was just a carrier as a boy.
Yeah, the messenger.
Another thing that Mother used to do, she used to lay people out.
Oh, okay.
If someone knocked on the door, used to go to the door, is Kate in? Because Mother was always called Kate. Her name's Louisa Kate, but she was always called Kate. Can you see Mother? Another half a crown, because she's just going to lay somebody out. So she was going to be gone, so lay somebody out. In those days, if there was a funeral, like someone in the road, the cortege would go up the high street and everybody would stop, and all the men would take their cap off and everybody would stand while it went up. Not like today, everybody haven't got time, they're just another event, isn't it? Next door, because that where the Turkish barber is, that's all part of the same 28 High Street. That was the lodging house. Next door there used to be a cake shop in there, and there was a furniture store at the far end called Goff's. That's no longer there. There was one each side of the road. Just before you get to the corner where that man is now, that was a Goff's in there. And of course it was Reed's Corner, which was the tobacconists on the corner, and Goff's was on this side of the road where the pub is now, where the Slug and Letters was. One thing I used to do, when I used to go and get the beer on a Sunday, if I had to wait for too long, which I might be waiting 5-10 minutes, because they knew what you wanted and who you were, so they were busy in the bar, they would make you wait. So one day I carried on round the back down to another pub, which was a cider house called the Rising Sun, which is just round the corner down the next road. You can access it through here. And I went in there, I said, oh, I want a jug of mild. He said, where you come? I said, I usually go to the Whittles. I said, I live in the high street opposite. Oh, he said, do you go? I said, yeah, I go every Sunday. He said, ever tried cider, my son? Nope. So he came out with a little glass of cider. He said, try that. I said, that's nice. He said, if you come to here on a Sunday, he said, you can have one of those every time you come. So I used to run like mad, didn't I, on a Sunday? Because I was no longer than waiting in the Whittles, because he would serve me just as quick, and while he was getting it, he'd give me a little drop of cider. So that was my invitation to cider.
Hence why you had cider at lunchtime then. You
Yeah,
absolutely
and that's
kept
when
on with
I
that.
first started drinking cider. But basically, the high street was the playground, as far as I was concerned, because we used to play hoops. I played marbles in the gutter, whatever, you know. We went down to the quay and whatever we did. But that's my youngest memories of Paul when I was there. You know, it led up to I was about 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, that sort of age. We can now go to where I used to go to school, which is no longer there, if you like. Now, when I was young, obviously, the bathing was done at home in a tin bath. It was
Yeah.
easy to walk up in the corner in a tin bath. But when I was somewhere in the age of about 6 or 7, they changed these, they made these here into public slipper baths. In the public slipper baths, there was ladies on one side and gents on the other. And when you went in, there were probably about 6 or 8 baths, cubicles on each side for the men and women. You went inside, you closed the door, when you finished, you pushed the bell, and they come and let you in, let you out again, ready for the next person to go in. As a kid, we used to go to slipper baths. It was only a couple of coppers. But when you were a youngster, at my age, they would never let you into a bath on your own. You had to wait for another youngster to come,
Oh, okay.
whoever it was.
All right.
Obviously, another
Be
boy of some
anybody.
sort, so if somebody you knew it wasn't. Then he would run the bath for you. You'd get a handful of soda, and they would close the door, but they wouldn't lock it. They'd keep an eye on you. But you could, so you have your bath, and after so long they'd say, "Come on, you boys, come on out." But you could be waiting there half an hour or longer to get a bath because people were coming in, and you're waiting for someone to match up with, so you can have a bath. So sometimes you're lucky, and sometimes it's a long wait. But that's where that was the luxury, because that was a real bath rather than the tin bath indoors. Okay. Right.
Oh, I didn't realise that.
I started school when I was 3 or 4, and this was my route to school every day.
Okay.
I used to wear boots with no socks. In those days,
Ouch.
didn't have socks. No, didn't have socks unless we lucky got some. But I used to walk to school. In those days, you used to get milk,
Okay.
a bottle of milk, when you were at school. I was about 4, I think, at school. May have been 3 or 4. I was that sort of age anyway, I don't know. So I went to school. I was taught by nuns.
Yeah.
Because it was a Catholic. Mother was a Catholic, and I was brought up as a Catholic. Not that I'm practicing now, but that was what I did when I was extra. So I would walk this way to school, come rain or shine. But obviously, it's changed now, up towards Hunker Hill, and what used to be the police station, opposite the mortuary. Used to be a builder merchant just there somewhere. These houses have not changed.
I was going to say, these are starting to look more original.
Yeah, these
aren't
are
they?
these are the original, pretty well the original houses from when I was a kid.
Yeah, down here somewhere you used to have the clinic. I used to take John.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there was it was somewhere round
over
about
there?
just there, because that's where I used to go to. If you went to the dentist at all, that's
Yeah.
where I went when I was a kid over there. There used to be a dentist over there as well.
You used to have a clinic.
I don't know what the plaque is, but this is much the same as these houses are always like original. Of course, at the end, that's that's completely different now. That didn't exist. I don't- With the Chris's that owned tobacconists and the barbers, I knew them well. So when I said that we were getting married, we're looking for a place, I said, "Well, we've got a flat
Yeah, that room up there.
that you can have at a reasonable price," and it happened to be that flat up there, with obviously a bed sitting, and there was a kitchen and
We had a
shared-
kitchen round the corner. The
Yeah,
kitchen
kitchen
was.
round the
So
sort of
like a
corner.
shared kitchen or...
No,
No,
kitchen
you had your
was
own
right, but you had to
kitchen.
share
We had a shared bathroom.
Shared bathroom.
Right.
So next door is Love Lane,
Opposite was the police station.
and the police station was there, which is not there anymore.
Yeah, there was a room up there, you see, where the brick wall is now. That was where the kitchen was
Yeah.
round there. And there was a shed there then, because the cat used to get in and out
Yeah,
the
there's the window there, darling.
Oh, there is the window. It's up there.
That
look,
was the
for
size
the
of our
kitchen.
lounge. There's our kitchen window there, because I caught a nice big bass one night, about a £4 bass. We had a cat, but he never bothered. But another cat came in,
No.
used to
in the
leave the
window,
window
yeah.
like that, and he came in and had a go at it. Yeah.
Our cat didn't bother. He let him do it.
Just here was a police station, which obviously doesn't exist anymore, because it was the lane, and there was a police station. And opposite, which you can't see now, that used to be where the mortuary was, because we used to see them bring their bodies occasionally, and of course the old cemetery was part of it. So further on, where we can't go any further, past the police station was another road called Norton Road, and as you went down Norton Road, on the right hand side was the school, Catholic school that I used to go to, and at the end of the road it was joined on round the corner to the Catholic church. So they were sort of intertwined, because the nuns used to teach us when I was a kid at school.
Yeah.
But like I said, what's there now is, I can't go there because it's not there anymore.
No.
Because if I went to the other side of the police station, which would be sort of like the width of that, so then there was the road that I used to go to school in, but I can't go there anymore. So we can't go any further this way, I'm afraid. That's the end of the line, but I haven't been here.
Usually do the show, so you're going now.
I can't remember the last time we came here, though.
Out the window. The window, we usually leave it propped open, so you get in the way of.
Nice name, isn't it? Appropriate.
It is for your first home.
Yeah, that was it. London early night.
Oh, with only, yeah.
On a Wednesday, we had to share a bath between us on a Wednesday. We were Mrs. Bennett's, living in there in London, in the Harrow. Yeah, Wednesday was our bath night. We had to share a bath.
It was Kenton you lived, wasn't it?
No, in the Harrow on the Hill.
Was it in Harrow on the Hill?
And yeah, was it Kenton?
It was
Yeah,
Kenton, but
yeah.
you used to go to Harrow on the Hill to the pub, didn't you? To the wheat,
No, I worked.
wheat sheaf.
No, I worked in. No, we lived in Harrow. Went to Kenton to work.
Wheelstone to work.
Oh, Willstone was it? Whatever. Yeah, but it was Harrow on the Hill. We moved. First went to London. Yeah, we rented a room, but we had to share a bath on a Wednesday. Take it in turns to go first. Because there's only one lot of water, so. Or maybe a half an hour, I don't know. Anyway, you used to put it on a scale and you used to shovel it into a sack and you used to put it into your hand cart. But what used to happen was, when you went into the main gasworks entrance, you got your ticket in there. You give the man the 1 and 6, and he'd give you your ticket. So you're in the queue. On the first shop trip, there might be about 20 people, 20 lads in front of you in the queue. So you got served pretty quick. The trick was, once you got your ticket, once you got to where the man was weighing up the coke, you gave him the ticket and you gave him a sixpence. So you got pretty well a double ration. So you had a big barrel of coke. Well, I used to do that on 3 separate trips for 3 people on a Saturday morning. At the end of the day, I ended up with sixpence, with which I could go to the Amity to watch the Saturday matinee for kids. And I used to go to the Chippy, the Amity chip shop, which was opposite, which the Chippy's still there, and get tuppence worth of scraps. You got a bag. In those days, they used to have where they fried the chips, fish and chips up, they put scraps to one side. Didn't used to render them down. They used to on the side. You could buy a bag for tuppence and 4pence to go to the pictures. So we used to have a bag of scraps before we went to the pictures. So, but after the second or third time, I would be back somewhere along by Pool Pottery in the queue, so I might be there for an hour before I even got into the gasworks. So I used to start about 8 o'clock in the morning and finish about 12. By the time I'd done 3 trips, and then the pictures was 2 o'clock in the afternoon.
Yeah.
So that was my Saturday morning, basically. You know, early up when to go to pictures. So the queue got longer and longer as the day went on.